Good afternoon, delegates. Please take your seats. Delegates, can you all please be seated? Thank you. We will continue with the other matters. And when we adopted the agenda, there was also a request to include change in the cutoff date indicated in para 17 of decision 28-2 by Egypt. And a CRP has been submitted by Egypt on this agenda item. And now I would like to give the floor to Egypt to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank the Secretariat for publishing the CRB in session document in their website. And I have honor to present this CRP. As you may recall, during the MOP 28, parties adopt many decisions. One of those adopted decision was decision 28/2, and regarding the cutoff date. The decision 28/2, paragraph 17, states that the cutoff date for the country with a baseline year from 20 to 22 is the 1st January 2020. Noting that Egypt ratified Kigali in 2023 in August, 22nd August 2023, and noting that the exceptional circumstances related to the COVID-19, the pandemic, and without setting a precedent, lead to delay the ratification of Kigali Amendment of our country. Before the ratification, a few factories have been established after the cutoff date, unfortunately, in the absence of the ratification of Kigali Amendment, which is essential to facilitate issuing national regulation to ban the manufacturing of domestic air conditioning unit based on R410A. So, having explained this, we propose a decision for your consideration, and it is a simple one, just to revise the paragraph 17 of the decision 28/2 to read as follows: that the cutoff date for eligible capacity is 31st December 2020 for those parties with baseline year 2020 up to 2022, and 1st January 24 for those parties with baseline years from 2024 up to 2026. Thank you for your attention, and the draft decision is for your consideration. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you. And now I open the floor for questions and comments. I do not have anyone requesting for the floor. So what I propose is that we will come back to this agenda item later when delegates have time to discuss during the course of this week. Thank you. And we also forgot today morning to hear back from the VSLS contact group. So I will see one of the co-chairs of the contact group, if they are here, to report back. Germany. Heidi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We had our first meeting in the contact group on BSLS during the lunch break yesterday. We jumped right back into the CRP and started discussing and cleaning up the operational paragraphs. We made good progress. Parties were very flexible to compromise. However, we could not manage to finalize the paragraphs, and there remains text that needs further discussion and consultation. We would therefore need more time during this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. We will indicate time and venue later. And with this, I will hand over to my co-chair.
Thank you, Miruza. Then I would like to go back to agenda item 4B, Roman I, emissions of HFC 23. And we have two CRPs posted, CRP 7 and CRP 8. And I would like to ask the proponents of CRP 7, US and Canada, to present it, and then we go to CRP 8. US, I guess. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I have to admit, I guess too, we didn't coordinate the presentation with Canada, so I'm looking at Philippe to see if you wish to take the floor. Just put your hand up and I'll turn it over to you. He's not putting his hand up, so I will proceed. So just to say, so we submitted this CRP last night as a follow-up to the discussion that we had yesterday as an outgrowth of the report from the SAP and the TEEP. You can see it on the portal. I will just go through it quickly. Just to say there are two preambular paragraphs that in effect, the framing we're trying to provide is just to express in some way the concerns over measured atmospheric abundances of HFC 23 being substantially higher than would be expected on the basis of reporting. The two paragraphs relate to two specific conclusions that are articulated in the SAP report and are included in the executive summary. And then moving on to the operational paragraphs, the first paragraph is a request to parties to share relevant HFC 23 monitoring data with international monitoring networks. And on a related matter, the second paragraph asks parties to update Article 7.3 TIR reporting to reflect the most accurate data on emissions of 23. Paragraph 3 reminds parties manufacturing Annex C Group 1 and Annex F substances of the obligation to ensure 23 emissions from relevant facilities are destroyed in accordance with Article 2J. And then on 4, it's a request to parties with substantial differences in their reported emissions as compared to the emissions derived from atmospheric monitoring to do two specific things. The first is to undertake actions to implement 23 obligations under 2J and adhere to any commitments undertaken in the multilateral fund. And then secondly, a request to investigate the potential reasons for such deviations and submit that information to the Ozone Secretariat. Paragraph 5 then requests parties producing HCFC 22 to submit information to the Ozone Secretariat on the methodology to estimate their HFC 23 emissions from those facilities, as well as any information on verification or quality assurance processes. And then the remaining paragraphs are requests specifically to the SAP and to the TEEP on various aspects. Paragraph 6 really asks the SAP to provide an update to the report that they've provided to this meeting on atmospheric concentrations of 23. Paragraph 7 is a request to the TEEP for information on, so there are multiple facilities in the world that are intentionally producing HFC 23, and I think it would be actually quite useful to get some very specific information about those facilities and the overall level of market supply and demand for HFC 23, given that we're presumably collecting large amounts of byproduct HFC 23. Paragraph 8, another request to the TEEP to provide information on verification guidelines that were used under the Clean Development Mechanism. For those that recall, these were projects probably from a decade or more ago on HFC 23 emissions control. And then finally, paragraph 9 requests the TEEP and the SAP together to further clarify possible reasons for the discrepancy between atmospheric monitoring estimates and reported emissions. And I left out a few details in there. Some of these reports, and we left this in brackets, some of these reports or information, I think the simpler parts we could see being done ahead of the open-ended working group. But for example, the requests to the SAP and this final request in paragraph 9, we think could actually be better served and the parties would be better informed and get more information if those reports came in before the meeting of the parties next year. And so with that, I would close my introduction and ask if my colleagues from Canada would like to add anything additional. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any reaction from Canada, so I assume that this was the intervention that Canada was also looking for. Then I would like to go to China and ask them to introduce the CRP 8. Please, China, you have the floor.
感谢主席。在昨天的全会上，我们代表团就 HFC 23排放及数据报告问题做了发言。同时，我们也认真聆听了其他缔约方提出的共性问题和普遍的关切。基于此，我们从高度关注 HFC 23排放量数据差距，并充分考虑各缔约方能力差异的角度，提出了一份题为《加强全球23排放和数据报告》的 CRP 文件。该 CRP 文件有以下的考虑，并且对下一步提出了相应的工作建议，供各缔约方参考。第一方面，当前造成大气监测繁衍的23排放量与各缔约方在 A7 数据报告下的排放量存在较大差距的原因尚不明确，需要各缔约方研究人员通力协作，深入研究其排放机理，包括对已知排放源和未知排放源的深入研究，这有助于解决我们共同面临的这一突出问题。因此，我们希望各缔约方鼓励研究机构在开展23排放研究国际合作。那么相关的要求，在我们的 CRP 文件的第3条第3段有相应的体现。第二，各缔约方报送的23排放量普遍明显低于大气监测繁衍数据，这反映了各缔约方 对23排放机理的认识还很有限，核算与报告方法学也存在着差异。我们建议各缔约方分享自己的做法，也希望秘书处组建专家组，综合考虑各缔约方可借鉴的经验方法，并在此基础上研究制定议定书下的专门的针对 HFC 23排放量核算和报告的技术指南。那么这个相应的文件的体现，我们是在我们的 CRP 文件里的第2和第4段。第3方面，各缔约方23排放水平因生产技术、装备、管理等方面的能力水平不同，也会存在着明显差异。尤其是对于 A5 条款国家来说，普遍缺少23排放，尤其是无组织排放的监测方法和减排技术路径。我们注意到 TIP 报告里提及了最佳实践的情形，因此我们建议，请具备最佳实践能力的和已经开展相关工作的国家，能够充分分享相关技术和信息，以帮助 A5 条款国家根据自身情况开展降低23排放的实践。那么我们相应的这个条款呢，是在我们 CRP 文件的第2段体现。谢谢主席。
Thank you, China, for introducing your CRP. I would like to ask if there are reactions from other parties in the room on the CRPs, and otherwise I already could put a way forward. And I see China on my list, and India afterwards.
谢谢主席。我想就这2份会议室文件发表一些评论。首先要感谢臭氧秘书处的辛勤工作，在今天凌晨相继上传了加拿大、美国作为提案方和中国作为提案方的关于 HFC 23排放的会议室文件。各位代表可能还没有充分的时间进行研究。通过刚才的介绍，我想大家可以感受到这2份提案的共同点和不同点。从共同点来说，2份提案都很关切 HFC 23排放以及数据报送的不确定性，也希望找到方法搞清楚这个问题。但是对比一下，我想参会代表不难发现，中方提案更加客观、科学、务实，充分尊重缔约方现有的努力和各自能力的差别，是抱着真正发现问题、研究问题、解决问题的思路和态度提出的。而加拿大和美国的提案却没有充分考虑科学研究以及各方能力的欠缺，简单粗暴地向缔约方强加多项议定书义务之外的要求，甚至暴露出对缔约方履约努力的不信任。特别的，将全球的问题倾向性地引导为一个国家，也就是中国的问题。似乎中国有什么超能力，可以代替160个基加利修正案缔约方以及全球科学界，把大家都搞不明白的事情一下子就解决了。在我们看来，这种想法确实匪夷所思。我们认为，每家提案存在3个方面的问题：一是不科学，不论是 SAP、TIP 近年来的报告，还是科学界议定书框架下的各次研讨，都说明 HFC 23的排放，特别是其排放源和真实的排放量，在科学上还有很多不确定性。 而各缔约方在报告数据时也很难做到准确。报送数据和大气繁衍数据普遍存在较大差距。美加提案无视这些科学疑问。二是不务实。从目前的研究来看，不论是 SAP、TIP 还是各缔约方，在进一步开展研究、提升技术能力之前，已经很难再就 HFC 23的排放问题拿出什么更有价值的分析，或是获得更准确的数据。刚才在关于旅行委员会报告的讨论过程中，我们听到在报送数据上，很多缔约方都存在一定困难。而对于 HFC 23的排放数据而言，实现所谓准确的报送难度则更大。美加提案不考虑实现的可能性，一味要求 SAP、TIP 和缔约方做这做那，我们不明白这些要求的意义何在。三是对缔约方不尊重。对于非议定书规定的履约义务，如果希望缔约方额外去做的，我们认为大会一定是请求、邀请缔约方去做，而且是要通过各方合作，缔约方认为是合理可行的，自行决定如何采取行动，而不是以强制的口吻要求。在用词上，我们强烈建议美加可以参考中方提案。更为严重的，从美加提案的第4条来看，似乎他们想表达的是，那些有 HFC 23产生的缔约方没有按照议定书的要求采取必要措施履行义务。我们想问，这样的臆断从何而来？议定书近40年的历史中，我们看到的是信任、合作、互相支持。正如昨天我们在讨论甲基溴议题的时候，虽然有的 A2 国家从2005年的淘汰年起，因为自身的原因持续申请豁免，但是我们看到的是其他缔约方的宽容理解。我们也为这是他们最后一次申请豁免而由衷欣慰，表示祝贺。那么，在 HFC 23这么一个复杂、涉及众多缔约方的议题上，却为什么没有体现这样的善意和支持呢？难道我们相信怀疑、指责可以解决问题？难道我们愿意议定书背离其相互信任、团结的精神，走向相反的方向？对此，我们深表遗憾和忧虑。总的来说，我们认为美加提案与中方提案在某些方面还是可以结合的。我们愿与各缔约方，特别是美国和加拿大，共同讨论产生一个基于科学的、善意的、可行的决定。但是我们必须强调，我们的讨论必须基于以下原则：第一，我们坚决反对任何针对特定缔约方的描述和要求；第二，我们不同意不考虑科学和缔约方能力的要求；第三，我们不接受、不尊重缔约方的任何表述。谢谢主席。
Thank you, China. I have India on my list, and if others would like to speak up, please let you know. I see India and then Kuwait and others. Then India, Kuwait first. India, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We thank the delegates of the US and Canada for CRP 7 and China for presenting CRP 8. Mr. Co-Chair, practices to control emissions of HFC 23 as a byproduct are consistent with those used to control other emissions associated with chemical manufacturing process and regulatory controls. These are well in place and implemented by the countries. Further, parties producing HCFCs and HFCs are also obligated to implement the provisions of Kigali Amendment. Next, countries have well-defined frameworks including national regulations for controlling and monitoring and reporting of emissions for controlled substances. We feel the focus should be here on seeking additional information from the SAP and TEEP, particularly on the differences in estimates of emissions, including on uncertainties on the Article 7 data instead of introducing new elements here. Mr. Co-Chair, we strongly feel and we have serious concerns on certain elements like assessment of needs of intentional production, CDM guidelines, and the UNFCCC guidance on HFC 23, which we feel are not relevant in this forum. Having stated this, we would like to assure you, Mr. Co-Chair, that we stand ready to discuss the CRPs further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and also good to know that you're willing to discuss the CRPs further. Then I have Kuwait and the European Union, and I would like to ask if others would like to take the floor. If not, oh yeah, I see Kuwait, European Union, United States, Australia. Are others wanting to take the floor? Otherwise, I would like to close the list. So it's Kuwait, European Union, US, Australia. Kuwait first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and I would like to thank the both proponent for CRB 7 and CRB 8, Canada, USA, and China. I think, as it's mentioned from both of these CRBs, that the good intention and will of collaboration together to reach our goals is there, maybe in a way that everybody have his understanding and the way that he see that this is the best way to solve that issue. And with understanding all the elements in both CRBs, I just want to say that, as the distinguished delegate from India mentioning, we would like to deal with HFCs 23 under the understanding of Montreal Protocol rather than understanding it or deal with it under the climate regime and the climate way and thoughts. Saying that, and just to give a chance for others to speak, I think in both CRBs there are so much similarity of request in a different way. So I think as it's the first element that I see is very relevant to both is the deviation in figures between SAB and TEEP. I think this is one of the issues that it's been clear for both of them, and we need to clarify it. So this is the startup of the engagement of this one. The second thing, I also mentioned that I'm not in favor of specifying a specific country or a specific one when we are just investigating issues and we want to relate to this one. And within this frame, I think that if we have a sort of informal contact group or a dialogue between the interested party who have an issue with NHFC's 23 byproduct to have a chance to meet and look to these ones and come up with a Midland solution, that will be a great job. And I'm very sure and trust China, USA, Canada, India, and the remaining that they have the will to do it. And I'm sure at the end of this meeting, both CRBs will be one CRBs that satisfied all the needs of the parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then I would like to give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I think the reporting back yesterday and the answers given by TEEP and SEP did underline that there is really a significant difference between reported emissions and measured emissions in the atmosphere. As parties, I think we have benefit of engaging on this and seeing where these differences can come from and what the actions are that we could support to correct it, including improving of reporting and reducing emissions. We understand that collaborating on that makes sense. We would be ready to do so, and we think that both papers have relevant actions and elements that we should discuss as parties. So we would be ready to do so in a contact group. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to give the US the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and just to say thanks to the EU for those brief comments, and I think to his point agree. I think we can have a useful discussion in the contact group. I think there's useful elements in both proposals. I think certainly we stand ready to talk those through and hear from other countries and try to find a compromise solution that we can move forward with. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points that were raised with respect to our proposal. I think maybe the first is to just explain, when we see the word request in a decision, and maybe this is an interpretation issue, but we don't view that as a mandatory requirement in terms of what a request is. And of course, we have several of those references in our own decision, so perhaps that's a helpful clarification for this body. Secondly, just in response to the point raised by China, there's nothing in our decision that refers to compliance or non-compliance. I'd say it's also not unusual in cases to have language that recalls or reminds us in some way of what the obligations are under the protocol. And then thirdly, just to say, we listened very carefully to China. We're still thinking these points through, but just to be honest with you, we didn't listen. The reason we came forward with this decision, it wasn't just because we were interested in this issue. As the EU just said, there's quite a substantial gap here. And the information, and this is scientific information, we have on the gap relates to both a global assessment based on monitoring data, but indeed, we have some very specific regional data. And so I'd refer you, and I mentioned this before, so I was trying to explain this. Some of the specific references in our proposal, they are directly related to the science. And if you look, for example, at the SAP report presented to this meeting, it's page 4 in the executive summary. It's the third paragraph on page 4. It's information from a scientific study from 2015 to 2019 on regional 23 emissions estimates derived for Eastern China. And so that's the reason that we have some of these specific points in here. So I think there is some common ground. We agree that there's a global issue here. I think we also agree with China. I think a discussion, and you see it both in what China's put forward, but also in what we've put forward, like having a discussion about some of these estimates and what the methodologies are, those types of things, that does strike us as a constructive discussion. All I would say is that from our perspective, it's not the only discussion. And I think if we want to find a solution to this, and I think in the end, and I think I said this before, I actually think we all have a common goal in mind. It's to reduce the amount of HFCs that are in the atmosphere. I think that's all of our commitment, every single country in the room, including all the proponents that have put forward decisions here. I think we have that goal, but we're now getting some scientific information that's suggesting something's not quite right. And listen, there's things that aren't quite right that happen all the time. This happens to be something that's not quite right. That's about 10,000 tons per year of a substance with a global warming potential of 140,000, and we have some geographically specific information on this. And so, listen, I think we approach this with an intent of mutual respect for every country in the room. At the same time, we have some very specific information that I think we really need to think about, and think about what it tells us and how that can lead us to solutions. And this isn't the first time we've seen sort of a similar information from our technical panels that I think has sort of helped guide our discussions here on a wide variety of issues in terms of having them help us to identify problems and challenges and to work together as parties to try to find solutions to those. So listen, we appreciate a number of the preceding interventions. India and Kuwait raised some issues that certainly we're very willing and happy to talk about. I think if we could go to a contact group, I do think there's a fair amount. There's some overlap, there's some not overlap between the two CRPs. But I certainly think we can sit in a contact group, work together as we always do, and come up by the end of this week with, I think a reasonable solution that will help us take, I think, some definitive steps forward in terms of trying to come to a solution to this issue that I think is in the interest of all parties. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, and I saw that Australia didn't want the floor anymore. We have a short break. We'll talk with my co-chair. Thank you for waiting. Let's say our proposal is to have those two CRPs be treated in a contact group and to see how the elements can be, let's say, merged, or how that can be dealt with in a good way. I think there was openness and willingness of a lot of parties to talk about the CRPs and look at the elements. So those two CRPs in one contact group, is that agreeable for everybody? I think it's agreeable, yes. And the two co-chairs of those groups, I will announce them now. There's Chantal Wellington from Barbados and Paul Kreinig from Austria. So with this, we concluded everything from the plenary today, and we can go into the contact groups. And one moment. We look into the schedule of the contact group. One moment. Thank you for waiting. Let's say it was puzzling. Let's say we were looking how to schedule it, because there are a lot of meetings also with regional groups and others to figure out how we could manage. So I will announce it now, and it will be put later on screen, and also exactly where. And also due to the amount of groups we have to schedule some in parallel. So I ask also for your flexibility on that as well. So from past 4 till 5:15, we have one group on MDIs and one group on HFC 23 forms, so the reporting forms. From 17:30 till 18:30, strengthening Montreal Protocol institutions. And then from 18:45 till 19:45, LRM, life cycle refrigerant management. So I will do it once again. So 4:15 till 5:15, MDIs in one room, and then HFC 23 reporting formats in another room. Then from 17:30 till 18:30, strengthening Montreal Protocol institutions, and from 18:45 till 19:45, life cycle refrigerant management. And now I'll give the form to, I wanted to give it to Meg, because then she can put it on the screen. Let's say the rooms will be mentioned in a moment, but at least, let's say one of them is CR2 level 2, and we have to look for the other room that will also be put on the screen in a moment for the group at 4:15 that is also taking place. So I have, let's wait for a moment, then we know for sure in which room. So please, it's on the screen now. So, and tomorrow morning at 8:45 till 9:45, HFC 23 emissions. And I would like to wish everybody good luck in the deliberations in all the contact groups.